Okay.
So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We're so happy to have you here to witness this really important discussion on collecting African American art. And the panelists have varied approaches to this, which they will share with you. It's interesting to me to have a panel of 3 African American men who are really at the forefront of the movement, and that is the preservation and cultivation of Black visual culture. So I am going to just briefly introduce them, and at the point where they are going to present and talk to you specifically about their collection, I will make a more formal introduction. So to my left is William C. Robinson. To his is Amath Gomis, and directly across from me is Gregory Morton. So before the gentlemen begin to present, I want to take just a couple of minutes to put this exhibition into context and also what is happening now in what is being called the Renaissance in Black art. So I have just a brief outline here. So the overview is the Renaissance in Black art market influencers, the categories of collectors, and as I go through this, I want you to, there's going to be a test afterwards, and I want you to determine like which category you fall in, and that goes for my panelists as well. And then we're going to talk about the role of the collector, and that is where each one of my panelists will talk to you about why they're passionate about collecting, why it's important to them. So, up to the 20th century, laws that segregated our neighborhoods, workplaces, and schools also led to the establishment of art institutions that excluded the work of African American artists. The culture of these organizations prevented access to acquisition policies that failed to allocate funding for the purchase of Black art and neglected to feature the work in exhibitions. They were run by individuals who embraced the de facto system of discrimination and justified their actions by deeming artwork created by African American artists as deficient, outside of the canon, a poor derivative of European art, and therefore not in sync with universal notions of artistic expression. The exclusion of the artistic production of Black artists was not limited to museums. It extended to galleries, auction houses, and government funding agencies, collectors, art books, magazines, and schools. If it were not for the efforts of Black collectors, Black museums, and historic Black colleges and universities who trained, nurtured, supported, and validated Black artists, they would have remained virtually invisible in the public realm. So the question is, are we witnessing a cultural shift towards integration and a wider cultural imperative? So our discussion today will demonstrate the role collectors have played in causing the shift. So here we have works, and all of you should know who these individuals are in these portraits, and perhaps also the artist who created the work. Kehinde Wiley, of course, created President Obama's portrait, and Amy Sherrill, Baltimore's own, and who was once represented by Galerie, Myrtis, we're always proud to say, created these wonderful pieces. So also in this shift of appreciation and valuation of Black art, we're seeing the consumption of Black art and values that are unprecedented. This piece by Carrie James Marshall, Pastime, created in 1997, sold for $21.1 million, including fees. The hammer price was $18.5 million. And many of you may know that P. Diddy, Sean Combs acquired that piece. Soul of a Nation, Art in the Age of Black Power. This exhibition, which was launched in London at the Tate Museum is traveling the country. Many of the artists who were in this exhibition are now in the Venice Biennale. Charles White, another artist whose works have escalated in value and price, highly sought after. Art market influencers. So we're going to just briefly look at who influences the market. Why are the prices going up? Why is there this shift in acquisitions by museums and others? So who's influencing the market? The commerce. You're a finance guy, so we're going to dig into help you. You're going to help me unpack that side of the business. So of course collectors, because if the art isn't being consumed, if it isn't being bought, then there is no market. So we need the consumers. We have the auction houses such as Swans and now Sotheby's, and many others are following in Swan's, path and following their lead in that they are now also either focusing on African American art or are seeking to establish departments and where they will solely offer the works of African American artists. We have art critics, curators, independent and those who work for museums and scholars. We need the critics, we need scholarship, we need documentation and research around the work of African American artists, especially now because they have been left out of the history books. Because they were seen as other, and the work was not a derivative or seen as a poor derivative of European art, there is not as much scholarship as there should be. Of course, we have authors like Dr. Samela Lewis, Dr. David Driscoll, and many others who have written about artists from the late 19th and 20th century, but we need curators to write about the contemporary artists of the day. Other factors that have greatly influenced African American art are the art fairs. Of course, there's Basel in Miami and Switzerland, and then the biennales such as the Whitney and the Venice Biennale. Of course, exhibitions are another way in which the art and artists are exposed. Galleries, of course, play an important role in that. And then there's the internet, because we're living in a global society. So, in my opinion, it was the opening of the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture that exposed African American art in a way that had never been done before. I believe that the opening of this museum helped to validate African American artists in a way that had not been done before. This painting, Grand Dame Queenie, which I sold, is by Amy Sherrill, and I sold it to the Smithsonian Museum. Is still on exhibit today. I took my oldest grandson a couple of days ago, and we took a picture of it and sent it on to Amy. And so we were having fun. It was a fun day. Other museums that are playing a critical role in exposing African American art is the California African American Museum, the Brooklyn Museum, the High Museum, the Getty Research Institute now, who is being run by Kelly Jones, I believe is her last name, and then of course university museums at historical Black colleges and universities that have always been there to support them. And I should also mention the Studio Museum in Harlem has played a critical role. So something else that's caused a ripple in the market was the decision by the Baltimore Museum of Art's director, Chris Bedford, to deaccession or sell several works from his collection by white male artists to bring equity to the museum's collection and acquire the work of African American artists and other artists of color. This did not create a void in their collection. They were very deliberate, I say they, because it was also in collaboration with the museum's board to make certain that when they sold a Warhol, they had others. So there was no void left by the IDEA session, but the acquisitions of those works have certainly enriched the museum's collection. So the categories of art collectors. These works will be explored further because each one of them is in the collection of one of these gentlemen here. So we have our novice collector. Get it? Category? Come on now. So we have our beginner. In the beginning, a lot of collectors come to me that are in this novice stage. They said, well, I'm just filling my walls. I'm just buying posters. I'm not really focused. I just don't want to live in a place that doesn't have art on the walls. So those are often the beginnings of developing your aesthetic, trying to figure out what images you want to live with. But there's no focus. It's just really kind of random. And then we have the casual collector. Those are individuals that it's an occasional purchase. They buy 1 to 5 works of art per year. They slowly start to visit galleries and museums. For some, the beginning is kind of intimidating. I don't want to go into a gallery. I don't want to feel the pressure of having to buy. But it really can be a wonderful experience, especially if you come here, because there is no pressure to buy. It really is a place for you to learn and become better educated about not just African American art. I mean, that is our area of specialization, but we do show works by a very diverse group of artists. So here's our avid collector. You see the eyes? You're very focused. The process becomes more deliberate. You define your aesthetic, right? You are probably buying between 5 to 10 works per year, and you're well informed. You started to educate yourself, you're visiting those museums and those galleries, and you're probably, finding your tribe, other collectors who are on the same path as you are. And then there's your master collector. See, that's the cheetah there. That's the one that's getting ready to take down that poor other collector that, doesn't even know that they're about to be preyed upon. I call it the hunt. And I have a quote from Mr. Robinson here that I'm going to share with you. So they are far more sophisticated in their approach to collecting. They have, they're connoisseurs. They serve on museum boards. They build a museum quality collection, and we'll be talking about why that's important. They lend artwork for museum exhibitions. They establish a private museum. Many collectors, I think like the Rubels, their collection is known worldwide, and there are others as well. And they just happen to come to mind. Where they've amassed such a large collection, they acquire a building, and they then put the collection on public view. They are involved in philanthropic efforts, supporting the arts, supporting the community through their arts, and certainly building their legacy through their collection is an important part of the process. Also, there's the educational materials to contextualize work within the canon. It's, for some, is wealth building. Art is an appreciable asset. So it is part of their investment portfolio. And then they work with art and legal experts, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So some of the master collectors that on this short list is Dr. Walter Evans, Pamela Joyner, who has established the Joyner Collection. Oh, look at that. William, I forgot you see, Robinson, and I did this a long time ago, Robinson Family Collection. I talk about him even when he's not in my presence. Mira and Don Rubel, they have the Rubel Family Collection. Joe Pertucci, they have the Pertucci Family Foundation Collection of African American art. And Dorothy and Herbert Vogel, the Vogel Collection, if you know anything about them. I'm inspired by them. I think they have both passed on at this point, but she was a librarian, he was a postal worker, and they started buying works by emerging artists in New York and bought works on paper, and their collection value was in the millions at the time of their death. And they donated a lot of it to the National Gallery in DC. So, I'm going to begin with Amath, and I'm just going to briefly read his bio. Okay, so Amath began to study art by reading magazines, scholarly works, going to museums, exhibitions, and talking to people more knowledgeable than he. And that's how he came to Galerie Myrtis. This helped him to not only train his eye, but to focus how he collects, which is mainly works by artists of the African diaspora, and have demonstrated a commitment to art as their full-time means of work. Amath has acquired works by Elizabeth Atman, Sanford Biggers, Ephraim Kwaku, Rashawn Griffin, Lauren Hazley, Alexandra Smith, Paula Wilson, Delita Martin, Kita Ahuja, Jazz Knight, Kathleen Cherry, Jenny Jones, and Ronald Jackson. So, Amath.
Hi, everyone. So this is...
Amath, did you turn the microphone on? It should be green.
Right?
Okay.
Okay. So this is the first piece I'll talk about. It's a piece by Ephraim that is in my collection. It was created in '92, as you can see. That's what he signed. One of the things that drew me to this piece, and one of the things I was interested in, was that this was a painting by an artist from the same country I was born in, the Ivory Coast, in West Africa. And there's a lot of, we're from similar tribes, and there's a lot of sort of cultural motifs here that I find interesting, where you look at sort of the stripes. They have a meaning, similar to the kente cloth, where there's a meaning there in the colors and also the pattern at the bottom. There's the leopard here, which almost is like a dreamlike version of the leopard, and what that represents culturally. There's a significance there. So I think that this is one of the things that drew me. And there's also sort of like a double meaning. If you look at the top right quadrant, where it looks like there's an eye, and it looks like it could be either a bird or a headdress. So there's a lot of things going on here that drew me to this piece. So that's pretty much it for this one. The next piece is artwork by Caitlin Cherry. She's an artist based in New York. This is one of her earlier works. She's had exhibitions at the Brooklyn Museum, as well as part of museum exhibitions like at the Studio Museum that we just talked about earlier. This is one of her earlier works where she really focused on using a maquette, which is basically like a diorama to paint from. And I like it because it's one, sentimental purposes. It's one of the first pieces I actually bought from an artist directly. And it's one which I value both sort of where she was going as an artist. So sometimes I think it's important to not just purchase an art because you like it, but you also have to understand that's a purchase into someone's practice, into someone's livelihood. So when you talk about being deliberate in your purchases, it is important to understand that this isn't just something to hang on the wall. For someone else, this is their means of livelihood. So in a small way, by purchasing any art, particularly this one, that helped her career move forward in a very small way, I think. And the next piece is Delita Martin. And this is one that I bought from Galerie Myrtis. I was educated about Delita Martin through Myrtis, and I think this is one of the things that's so important for any collector at any level, is to build a team. And part of building a team is finding people who are more knowledgeable than you are and getting them to provide you with information and knowledge so that you can understand both why you're drawn to something and why you're not drawn to something, and then figure out how can you train your eye to see what you're interested in, and if it's challenging for one reason or another, understand why that's challenging. For me, this work wasn't necessarily challenging per se, but it was something that I was drawn to. I really enjoyed Delita Martin's practice, so I've yet to see a work from her that I dislike. I just see works that I just can't afford, so that's just an issue I have. But I think that for me, this is a really important piece because it sort of signified the first time I worked with someone who had helped train me to view art in a way that I think is really helpful. So that's why this piece is here. I think the next...
I just wanted to say that the title is actually The Watcher, so that's incorrect.
Yeah.
And that, I don't remember the dimensions, but it's also much larger than that too.
I think it's 50 by 40.
It's a large piece. Those are your dimensions.
So this is a, so Lauren Halsley is an artist who I found through the Studio Museum. She was, every year the Studio Museum has 3 artists that are in their residency program. And some of the major African-American artists of our time have gone through it. Carrie James Marshall, pretty much everyone. So the way I found out about her was through that process. When I lived in New York at the time, she was doing her residency there, and I just liked what she did. She focuses a lot on drawing, at this point, using gypsum board and carving out images and iconography from her neighborhood in LA that she grew up that's facing gentrification. So she really focuses on that as a means of preservation and sort of harkening back to sort of the Egyptian mythology, Egyptian hieroglyphics. So that's one of the reasons that I was drawn to this piece in particular. You see the long nails, you see the 60s, you see the license plate, you see a lot of iconography that if you grew up in an urban environment in the 90s and early 2000s that you see represented here. It kind of reminds me of a lot of what you see Bradford in his work, where he is collecting a lot of signs and material that are in neighborhoods in LA that are facing gentrification. So it's similar to that in that regard. And then the next piece is Paula Wilson. This is a print that I picked up, ironically named Picked. I like it because one of the things that drew me to it was the imagery that's here. This is one in which there's a lot going on. So in the top left quadrant, you see a figure emerging out of the water. You see a neckline. You see birds. You see a lot of things that, for me at least, really inspired me to purchase it. So that's pretty much it for what I have to show, I think.
So next we're going to have Gregory. Greg is the owner of 5 historic homes built by Frederick Douglass in Baltimore. One, right? That came, 1.5. I know that came up several times that you owned. He built 5.
Built 5 homes.
And you own 2.
Well, one. Actually, I had ownership, complete ownership of one.
Microphone.
And partial ownership of the second.
Okay. Known as Douglass Place. Douglass Place became a nationally recognized historic site in 1983, and in 2015, Morton purchased and restored one of the Douglass Place homes. Inspired by Douglass's legacy, Morton stylized the home as an homage to Frederick Douglass, featuring African American art, historical artifacts, and literature. Greg currently shares his home as a well-themed vacation rental for Baltimore visitors to experience, and is currently working to restore additional Douglass Place properties. So is the video?
You want to see the video?
Yeah.
Okay, let me have that.
All right, so we're going to play your video.
So I'm like, well, why don't I just buy a place down here, you know? Out of the blue, my mom texts me, and she says, you know what? Frederick Douglass' house is for sale. You should get that. And I said, really? Yeah. So pretty much, she started it. I knew the house existed because, you know, I was around and about. But when it came available, I think you saw it on TV or in the paper or something.
On the news. I saw it on the news, and I said, oh my goodness, Frederick Douglass' house, oh my.
Yeah. It's like, man, this is Frederick Douglass' house. I can't even believe that it's even available to be had. I would kind of be silly to not get it. So I did so. So when I looked around at like how the home was stylized, I'm like, well, I'm a black man. I like representations of black culture that are positive, reflections of self. And because it's Frederick Douglass' home, it just happened to be in line with this sort of like abolitionist, civil rights, black love, you know, move kind of idea. But it was pretty much just because I am who I am. It wasn't so contrived. I just happened to step back and look at it and be like, man, I got like actual, like real authentic artwork in here just because it's who I am. I collect artwork and expressions of black culture, so it's pretty much all over here. And then it's in line with the history. So I was like, well, this kind of is experience that I think I could share with other people. And that's where the Airbnb came from. I just felt like God put it in my heart and just put it in my spirit, like, you should do this and you should do it the best that you can, because I felt like it's also paying homage to the history of Frederick Douglass. It's paying homage to Baltimore. It's like Baltimore love as well.
Okay, so, alright, so right, that interview was like 2 years ago, I think. It was like 2 years ago. So that's when essentially Baltimore caught wind that I was doing this, and they were just like, wow, this is strange and obscure, but also pretty cool. So that's 2 years ago. So let's talk about the actual collection, because my collection has grown since then. So this is the piece I just picked up, which is the Hindi Wiley sculpture. I picked it up because, based on the notoriety that Hindi Wiley's gotten, based off of course, the Obama portrait, and then also the fact that because people are becoming aware of what I'm doing, I get good looks when people contact me like, we think that you should have this as part of your collection because they know that I'm sharing it with the community. So a big portion about my collection is I'm going direct to the community and to, like, you know, folks who are wanting to experience living with it. So in a sense, a big part of my collection is about the space in which I display, which is Frederick Douglass's home. So because of that, and I'm pretty much in this very humbly, very much trying to learn and grow, I get good looks from folks who just want to assist me in doing what I'm doing because they see the larger context, which is creating spaces to display the work, not just having the work over your bed or something. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I'm really going very directly to the folks who want to, you know, experience being with art. So that's this sculpture. I'm actually pretty proud of it. I got an awesome deal on it. It cost me a grip, but I still got an awesome deal on it. Okay, this is Gregory Morton. I picked this up from Myrtis. So I ran across Myrtis when I first started doing this idea of art collecting. Well, actually getting more serious about it. I started with collecting artwork just because it was naturally something I was interested in. I was the guy who looked at the value of it from a sentimental value, but also from a market value. So I was very keen on grabbing artworks from auctions that had places that had provenance where I could actually verify the market value. Because in an event that I needed to get some bands out of it, I'm like, I need to be able to get this back into the market and have that appreciated, not just by me, but by other folks as well. So when I moved away from just getting into collecting by having market verifiable things, I started to get into contemporary arts. And contemporary arts is about your love and your value of sentiment, but it's unchecked by the market per se. You're pretty much believing in your love for the work, and you're also investing in the artist, so it's more of a gamble in some regard. So I happened upon Myrtis because she's awesome in the space, I mean, to be very honest, and she started to educate me about just, you know, collecting with an eye and a focus. And when I came here, I was immediately attracted to the Lita Martin's pieces. And this is actually the first contemporary piece of artwork that I actually purchased. It's the very first one. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, this is now like the second, I think, which also I originally spotted at Myrtis. So when I first came, I was very much attracted to the Lita and Jamia. And I just said, oh, I just knew, I kind of got struck by it. I think this is awesome. And I was introduced to this by Myrtis. The great story with this is, I have a very good relationship with Jamia. Because I met her on occasion just randomly, and I was so touched by her piece, I was just like, man, this is so awesome. I just really believe in you. You're gonna make it. This is like awesome. And just because I was just very honest and open about it, like my appreciation for her work, she had just got some really good news like that morning. And she was just so overwhelmed about the news that she had gotten. She hadn't told anybody, but the way that I came to her is just really organic, and she was just like, oh, I really want to make sure that we stay in contact, and something about just the way that you approach me, we should always remain in contact. So I established a really good relationship off of just purchasing this piece and also being introduced to Jamia by Myrtis. And she's doing pretty well, like really well. Like now it's just growing, growing and glowing. This is Nate Lewis. So Nate Lewis is a contemporary artist as well. I picked this up from Morton Fine Arts. But the thing about it was this: I met him. I get struck. I call it struck, which is I feel like I get like visions. I'm in the right place. I meet the right people. I'm very vibrant and organic. So I happened to just be at an event. I'm in New York, just chilling, kicking it, and I'd seen some of his work at Morton Fine Art, and I just happened to be in an event kicking it. So I ended up having this cool conversation with this guy. Like, oh, what's your name? He's like, oh, your name. He's like, oh, you're Greg. Like, no. Like, so I have a really good relationship with him as well. The reason why this piece is important to me as well, he's doing this sculpture paperwork, which I've never seen really before. It's very unique. He's like a guy who was studying to become a doctor. So he would take a scalpel and he's picking at this, pick, very OCD in a sense. But what he does is create this great detail and he's sculpting the paper. He's now moved on to residencies in New York. He's in a pretty large show that's going to be touring around multiple museums. He just got announced. I don't know the name of it right now.
The Minute Change?
Minute Change, yes. So I just knew that he had something unique, and he's moved into actually making the paper, creating like a photograph, and then he just sits at it day in and day out, picking at it. So it's this really great relief and sculptural like presence in the work. Okay, so this is Our Grandmothers, which is an art book actually. So it's a poem by Maya Angelou, illustrated by John Biggers. So I picked this up, like, I ran across it once before. So with art books, it includes a bunch of prints from an artist, visual artist, and then some written works from a literary artist that you're essentially aware of. But the display of it is a little bit different because most works that people, they want something to put on the wall. So sometimes when you catch these art books, you'll catch them as completely separate, like a paper conservator will separate the works out so that they can be easily displayed. Sometimes you can get certain dishes that are already separate in that bag. With this, I ran across this as separate prints at Swan once before, and I passed on it because I was just like, and then right before Maya Angelou passed, this came about, and I passed on it the first time, and I just really wanted to have it in the collection because it was Maya Angelou. So I was mostly attracted to it by Maya Angelou, and then of course John Biggers is pretty well known as well now, so I figured it was a good mix. And I picked this up like right before Maya Angelou passed, like literally days before, maybe less than a month. And with that, I've been having people actually contact me about getting this from me because of Maya Angelou's passing. So I don't want to profit from her passing, but in some regard, it raised the value of this work just because it memorializes her and when folks want to remember her. So that's what I see. Okay, this is important because this is literally the very first piece that I picked up from the renowned auction. And this is a poster, it's a collectible poster. Urban C. Miller was pretty much P. Diddy in 1924. Like, seriously. No, he was that guy who was very successful in his traveling shows and also financing and putting on stage plays. The reason why this is important to me is because, well, as a collector who's starting out, I was very keen on the values in which I was getting in, right? So a couple $100, $1,500, $1,200, a couple thousand. I felt like I naturally progressed into comfort levels of my spending. And this was a piece that I paid pretty good money for, but it wasn't a very expensive thing, right? It's not hugely expensive, but it's beautiful. It's preserving something that's 1925 and it has a very deep historical reference. And I had provenance on it, so I can definitely sell this back in the market where I got it from, and it'll be worth more than what I paid for. So this piece is important to me because it kind of represents one of the first pieces that I picked up from a reputable auction. Okay, so here's a bonus. I'm actually passed this. I don't own this piece. I got offered this piece just a month ago, and I actually passed on it. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because I want to kind of give you an idea of why did I pass on it, right? As I said before, because I do what I do, I get decent looks from folks who offer me things because they think that it would be nice for my collection. But, it happens all the time, and then you turn around, you're spending $5,000, you're spending $6,000, it essentially becomes expensive, right? So, I'm a person who is very conscious of my dollar. So I kind of felt like I already spent a lot of money this year on work, so I just kind of put a hold on it and be a little, reasonable with myself. The next thing is, I'm trying to move really away from print so much, right? I'm really getting into, original works from American contemporary artists, because if you believe in them and you love it, that's one thing, but also the idea of value increase is there more so with the original works than with prints. The second thing is, I love Deborah Roberts' work. I wasn't completely in love with this one, and if you've ever seen her works in person, sometimes the flatness of the print takes away the beauty of, it's not as beautiful as the original. The flatness of it is actually really a dimension. So I think this was a great piece. If it came around again at the price that I was offered for, I would definitely grab it. But at the time, as a collector who's essentially doing this on my own, I have to be conscious about the money that I spend, because I'm not doing this to be in debt. I'm doing this to create the experience and to gain value. So I'm not really done with all of that.
Thank you. We're going to talk about budget. All right, so next we have William C. Robinson. I'm just going to read some brief. Well, see, Mr. Robinson's a little difficult. He didn't provide a bio, so we had to go look at articles and all of these other things to kind of track down his art collecting and why it's so important to him. So in 2016, William C. Robinson retired from his position as police chief from East Orange, New Jersey Police Force after serving how many years?
33.
33 years. So I'm reading from an excerpt from an online article that appeared in the International Review of African American Art in 2015 by John Welsh. The title is "A Better Way of Policing, a Police Chief's Art Advocacy Benefits the Community." So just a brief excerpt. East Orange, New Jersey is becoming an increasingly safe place to live and work because of a police chief whose sensitive and deeply caring leadership is reinforced daily through his love of art and commitment to sharing it. As chief of police, William C. Robinson has achieved the distinction for his city of realizing the highest crime reduction, 79% in the country in the shortest amount of time. You should come to Baltimore. Police stress. Now here's the important part. Police stress is well documented. Robinson daily decompresses from his high-pressure job by entering the transporting realm of visual art. When I walk in my front door, I am faced with beautiful, thought-provoking works of art that banish the worries and difficulties of public safety, he says. Collecting and viewing art, of course, is not a panacea for the complex welter of problems related to public safety and crimes, but it does provide a clue. Most people in traditional societies creating things with their hands, the making and doing connected mind, body, and spirit, providing an outlet for tension and a sense of mastery and balance to their lives. I just think that speaks so highly to, thank you, the importance and the relevance of art and what it can mean beyond our walls, how it can impact us spiritually and speak to our humanity. So, Mr. Robinson?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi.
After this talk, I want to speak to you how you control the money. I know somebody because I don't have a budget. I try every time. It never seems to happen. So I want to speak to you about that. But my passion in art started many, many years ago. And people ask me, well, why did you start collecting? And I can point out maybe 4 or 5 different things. The most important thing is that my mother told me to. She used to take, I grew up in New York City, and she used to take me to all the museums and different art galleries during that time. And a lot of places, when I visited the museums, didn't have works of African American art. And if they did, they were done by Thomas Hart Benton and other artists that weren't of color. So I asked her, I'm like, well, where are works by African American art? And she says, well, like everything else, like music and literature, it takes time for people to understand the importance of African American art. So when we talk about collecting, as when I talk about collecting,
That's all right.
as you can see, it's very passionate for me because it tells our story in another way. We read about our stories, in literature, We hear about the trials and tribulations in music, but to actually see it visually, how they hung us, how they treated us, not everyone, because we couldn't have made the progress that we made without other nationalities supporting us and backing us up. And I'm gonna try not to get too far off collecting. But why is it, some of those things that I just explained is why collecting is so important to me. Why it was so important for my mother to let me know that I need to do it. Why it's so important for me, for my kids to grow up with art. And now I have grandchildren. I just took my granddaughter to the Museum of Modern Art. I took her to New York to the Historical Society to see the Augusta Savage show. And as a collector, I've been collecting now since 1997. I have 2 boys, and what I started doing with my boys to build their collection is, you know, when Christmas and birthdays come around, we buy our children a lot of toys and the things they want, a lot of games now, a lot of technology. Well, I did all that for my children, but I also took them to galleries, and we looked at art, and each one of them, my 2 boys, chose a piece of art, and I bought it for their birthday or for Christmas, so they would understand the importance of it, because with my legacy of collecting, they will be the recipients of it. And I want them to understand the value of art, how it appreciates. And I say to them all the time, and I say to a lot of people, I say, how many things do we have that tells our history, talks about our culture, that we can buy and put on our wall and appreciate every day? I can't think of it, but art is that. You know, we buy cars, we buy jewelry, we buy purses, we buy, and I was one of those people. When I was younger, I bought leather suits for $1,500. I wish I would have known about art at that time, because now the things that I like cost a lot more than $1,500. But through my collection, I started out with a gentleman by the name of Ed Anderson. He was a major collector back then, and he was also an art advisor. And this was probably in 1992, 93. He took me around New York to ACA Galerie, where I saw, I can't remember his name now, but I can't remember the artist's name now. But I wish I would have bought it then, because his work's worth millions of dollars now, and they were only worth tens of thousands of dollars at that time. But being an inexperienced collector at that time, not even a collector, being an inexperienced patron and thinking about the arts, when they took me to these locations and they were telling me $2,000 or $3,000, $4,000 or $5,000, I thought he was trying to rip me off. I was like, why? Art on the wall? I mean, I didn't understand it at that time. But as I grew and as I educated myself through books and read Alima's Todd book, I realized the importance of art. I realized the different mediums of art. And I started developing a taste for a particular type of art. Most of my collection, I have approximately now probably about 350 pieces in my collection. I collect, from late 1800s to the 21st century. I collect, I quote a lot of people call masters, and I try to understand what a master is as an artist. And each and every person that I asked gave me different answers. Some of the common answers were, well, they were academia, but then we know individuals like J.D. Lawrence, another artist, didn't necessarily go to college, but yet they're considered masters. So I realized, well, that's not a point that I can take. And I will take that point and understand it, because it is important. When you're collecting, it's what I tell people all the time is, when you spend a couple of $100, $1,000, you buy what you love, but you always follow that process of buying what you love. But when you start talking about spending tens of thousands of dollars and more, then, as this gentleman said earlier, you want to make sure the money that you spend that God forbid, if you have to sell it, that you'll at least get what you put out, what you put out, or even more. So my primary focus in my collection. Well, when I first started out, I didn't have the focus. And then I started to realize that my collection was kind of mirroring who my mother was, an educator. And I realized a lot of the artists that are in my collection were educators, professors. And I didn't start out the traditional way. There's commercial art or popular art that people talk about, and there's also fine art. Well, I was initially exposed to popular art, commercial art. And I have a lot of friends that are collectors, and we go back and forth because this first piece up here was the first piece I ever bought in 1997. It was by Charles Bibbs. When I used to go to a lot of fine art symposiums, he would always come up because people that just knew about him and wasn't fine art collectors would say, well, why don't you recognize him? So when I went to the first Puck Building opening in 1997, I was standing in front of Gerald Mecklenburg's gallery, in his booth, and they had a beautiful Romare Bearden painting. And it was called In the Green Shade. It's an amazing piece. It's on the cover of a book. But at that time, it was $40,000. So I said, well, I know I can't afford that. And while I was watching that, two young ladies walked up to me, and they said, oh, you're a collector? And I was really proud of myself because I just purchased this Charles Bibbs. I said, yeah, I collect Charles Bibbs. And they said, Charles Bibbs, you're in the wrong place. This is not the right place for you. And it kind of crushed me. But what you have to understand, and what I want to explain to anyone out there that's thinking about collecting, is that don't let anyone crush your spirit about what you buy and what you purchase, because it's about you and what you love. The only thing I say to you is understand what the artist means or what the artist represents. And Charles Bibbs was an artist that felt he wanted to make multiples and high number of prints because he wanted to make it more affordable to people to collect. Now, fine artists have done the same thing. I've read books where Elizabeth Catlett felt the same way, John Biggers felt the same way, Dr. Ash felt the same way. So never let anyone discourage you. And what I said to myself is, those women just said that to me, but if you go right around the corners of the Fine Black Art Show, Charles Bibbs is there and had most people in his booth. But it's all about a person's perspective. So,
I really want you to go through the slides, and then I'm going to
okay,
ask the questions. Okay? So you talk to us about this.
So after Charles Bibbs and reading the Limitage book and going to the Black Fine Art Show, I got a different perspective on collecting. And I wanted to start collecting fine art. And my next purchase was Norman Lewis. This is the Untitled Nude, and I actually acquired it from his daughter who had a gallery in Newark. And I had a passion for nudes, but when I saw this Norman Lewis, with this painting, he's only done 12 large nudes. And when you talk about investment and you're looking at art in that way, when a person has only 12 of a certain style, then that gives that artwork reference. And when you turn around and decide to resell it, you have, more than what you paid for. The second one is another Norman Lewis, which is his abstract work, but it's more of a figurative. You can actually see the outline of a female body, and you can see where her head is. And as you see, this was done in 1969, and that was done in 1968. Next. This was, I heard a lot read about Romare Bearden, and in studying and reading, I realized that collectors and the Art Society felt that his collages were his most important works. And as a collector, I said, well, I would love to get a collage. And I met Essie Green, and this is from Essie Green's Galerie in Harlem. This work has traveled for 3 years throughout the country and outside the country. It was probably my first work the most I spent for work in my first 6 or 7 years of collecting. And as you can see, it's probably one of the smallest works, 7 by 9 inches. The sequence of works are how I purchased them once I started collecting fine art. This is by Charles Austin. This is one of his African Family series. This is another work on paper. Again, I buy a lot of work from Galerie. This was purchased from King Keller Galerie in New York. This was acquired at Freeman's auction house. I was going to an auction one day at Freeman's, and for some reason this work just hit me. Sometimes, you know, I love all my work, but there are certain works that just hit you a certain way that you feel like you just have to have it. And these are the times that when you go to an auction house and you say, well, I'm only going to spend this amount of money, you end up hoping no one else bids on it, but sometimes it never works out that way. Next. Now this work, when I collect all work, because I'm an investigator and I worked as a homicide detective, I'm always researching and looking and looking and looking. This is a work by Palmer Hayden. And I acquired it from a friend of mine who was representing the estate at the time, who's also a collector. And where Myrtis had that shot of the cheetah chasing the gazelle, well, that's him, because normally with most collectors and our friends, and some of them are here, we tell each other what we're buying at auction so we don't end up bidding against each other. Well, not this collector. And this is the time that I got him, because he was selling it, but he didn't realize the history of it. And I was going through the Smithsonian archives one day, and I was looking at the Harmon Foundation in 1933. It's a black and white video, no sound, and they were showing the Harmon Foundation 1933 show of Negro, what they call a Negro artist back in those days. And James Porter and Eleanor D. Roosevelt were looking at this in this video, which will be the next video. That's the 1933 video of the Harmon Foundation in 1933. And over to the right, you can see that same painting. The man is James Porter, and the woman is Eleanor Roosevelt. So when I saw that, I had an opportunity to call my friend and say, hey, did you know this was the 1933 Harmon Foundation catalog? And I got the thrill of a lifetime, because he sold it to me and he said, if I knew that, I wouldn't sell it to you. And as I said to you, that's the importance of reading and collecting. I know Myrtis asked a question about what are your 3 most important pieces. Well, all are important to me. 2 pieces that are not here, which is very important, is one of my tanners that I purchased from Sotheby's. I will get back to that in a minute. And why it's important, because I'm from New Jersey. And the piece that I mentioned earlier that Bill Clinton bought for the White House was a Jersey piece from Atlantic City. And the Smithsonian has a piece called The Marshes of New Jersey. This piece came up with Sotheby's, but I had read about this piece in a book by Tanner, written by a young lady named Mosby, and I realized that this was not this piece, but a piece in my collection that I purchased called The Sands of New Jersey was a gift from Tanner when he was in Europe to the Hartwell, Bishop and Miss Hartwell in Cincinnati. Now the significance of that was, through my reading, is that the Hartwells were the first people that gave Henry Asa Tanner a show at their home, trying to raise money for him to go to Europe. And when they gave the show, no one acquired his work. So they purchased 4 or 5 pieces for him to go to Europe to study. And while this was at Sotheby's, they didn't even know this. So in their writing about this piece, they didn't mention it, which if they did, would have gave more provenance and added more value to the work. So I was able to get this work at a steal because I knew the importance of it. It was a series that he did about New Jersey, and he only did 3 pieces. And the day that I went to pick it up, I was told by the director of the art department that expert had called in and gave him all the information that I just said to you. And he said to me, if I would have known that and put that in the catalog, that piece would have probably been 4 or 5 times more than what you paid for. So as collectors, that's why it's important to read and follow. I'm sorry. Go ahead. This is Edward Mitchell Bannister, a 19th century artist. As I said, I collect 19th century up to contemporary art. This is Richard Mayo, an artist out of California. This is another piece that I bought from Bedolla. No, actually, I bought this from his daughter in Atlanta. I saw this at a gallery prior to buying it. I hope my chicks don't get mad at me saying this. You know what I mean? And when I saw it at the gallery, I couldn't afford it. So after a period of time, if the gallery doesn't sell something, it goes back to the owner. And I happen, and this is important. This is the importance of building a network of collectors and art professionals, is because you can find out about pieces you see somewhere. I saw this at a gallery, and they told me that it was owned by the daughter, and another collector introduced me to the daughter, and I was able to buy this piece. And this piece depicts when African Americans was fighting in World War I, when they were fighting with the French against the Germans. And it's called 3 Soldiers. This was the cover of my catalog that I had, my exhibition I had at Lafayette College. Right?
Yes, which is on this catalog here. So I'm going to just go through these because we want to open up for panel
Okay.
discussion. So we just look at those.
That's Charles Seagree, El Desire Couture, out of New York. That's Dr. Ash Science Notes. That's Elizabeth Catlett, Mother and Child, Orange Onyx. That's Augusta Savage, Gaming. Selma Burton, Mother and Child. This was my art exhibition that Myrtis was talking about in 2015 at Lafayette College. Besides having the exhibition, I was very proud, but the reason that I was proud, the next slide. These are students from the high school, juniors and seniors that are part of my police power program. A lot of the boys, they were part of my basketball program. When we first started with them and having a study group with them, they all basically had D's and C averages. With my officers studying with them and having study groups and we engaging with them, they all ended up getting scholarships, academic scholarships and athletic scholarships. And when they came out to see my collection at Lafayette, again, juniors and seniors, we also made a college visit, and at least 3 of them went to Lafayette College after.
So let's open it up. I want to talk to these gentlemen first, and then we're going to open up the floor for Q&A. So Greg, everyone has a unique approach with the 2 of you, and then Amath will be embarking on this as his collection grows. But tell us why you decided to open up the Frederick Douglass home to the community, and the impact that it's had on the community, and how that drives what you acquire and place in the home.
So I think it's very organic for me, and I believe in God. I feel like I get.
You gotta get the right too.
Yeah, so that's like very organic for me. I just believe in God, and I feel like I get a message, and I just go for it, right? So as far as the Frederick Douglass home, I just was buying a home in Baltimore. I was coming back and forth to Baltimore, buying a home, and Frederick Douglass home became available, and I was like, what? And I passed on it at first because I was like, I wanted something turnkey, but I couldn't sleep at night. I'm like, I gotta get this. It's Frederick Douglass' home. So that was something that was just a gift from God, and God kind of opened up the sky and made it possible. I'd already had an African American arts collection because, the sort of work that I do is I'm a workaholic. I just put in a lot of long hours, and, I always want to surround myself with positive representations that get me motivated to go out here and do this business that I gotta do. So it's something, I just want to see positive reflections to keep me inspired. So I already had started with the African American arts collection. And then the Frederick Douglass house, and then I just staged it, decorating it for my own personal use, for myself to be comfortable. And I just had a moment. I just looked at it, and I was just like, it's Frederick Douglass' house, African American art collection. This is in Fells Point, Arbor East, like 3 blocks up from the waterfront. I travel around for work. I'm not really here like regularly all the time. I should share this with people. It wasn't anything that it wasn't deliberate. I just got struck one day and I was like, oh, I should share it with people. And when I decided to actually list the places as a vacation rental, it was, I think it was January 1, 2016, I think. And I just wanted to see what happened because this place is blacker than black. It's super black, super black, right? So I thought that maybe it would be shunned in some way by the larger audience because it's so unapologetically black. But I was like, all right, let's see how it goes. And then within like 3 weeks, the place got booked up for like the whole year. And I was like, whoa. I was honored that it happened, but I was just like, man, this is my house. So it was really organic how that started. It was something that I just kind of had a feeling about it, and I went for it, and it just became this. So now what it's turned into is a space that I ultimately want to get back to the community. So it's essentially I'm building a gallery in a sense, like almost a mini museum, it's a living museum. That's what I'm building, and I know that's what it is. And other people kind of see that that's a trajectory that I'm on. So the idea is to run programs out. This is hospitality management as well as curation, interior decorating, design. And I kind of want to have programs where I, lend to increasing, I would say, the notoriety of individuals who are emerging in those spaces, as well as creating an opportunity for artists that I care about, not only to have and collect their works, but be a part of this vehicle that helps to increase their notoriety in this market. So it's become that, but I'm just following the vision in the field that I feel like God looked out for me, so I'm looking back out.
So you tell us about the exhibition that you curated at the Frederick Douglass Museum in Annapolis.
So the Frederick Douglass Museum, again, pretty organic. I got invited to a tour. A guy who runs, he does like tours in Fells Point, and he always stops past the house. So the house that I have has a plaque on it. So it's a part of like these Baltimore tour programs. And then also individual travelers in their own accord will hear about it and just stop past. So at any point in time, especially in the summer, in the spring, you just see people outside. Sometimes buses pull up and it's just like in front of the house taking pictures. And I'll pop out like, hey, whatever. And at one point, in one of these occasions, I met a guy who runs a tour, so he just invited me to come along. And when he invited me, he also had the executive director of the Frederick Douglass Museum there as well. And everybody was just like, oh, you own this place. Like, people were very surprised, right? So I invited her back, and then she took a look, and she was like, whoa, this is like the year of Frederick Douglass' bicentennial. Can you please do an exhibit? Can we borrow some of your works, and can you do an exhibit that feels like your home? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I decided to take a little step further after seeing the space, because Frederick Douglass owned multiple properties in Maryland. So because the space had enough corners in it, I decided to stage each corner as a homage to each of the homes that Frederick Douglass owned in Maryland. So that was Douglass Place, which is my property. Then there was the Twin Oaks, which is in Annapolis. And then there's the Anacostia Mansion, which is in D.C. So I toured the homes, and I essentially created corners that were, representative of the feel and look, and then I staged artworks that I had in my own collection and some things that I borrowed from some other art collectors who have become kind of mentors of mine. And it went very well, and it kind of launched a couple other business endeavors that I've gotten into, as far as like, I do kind of like fashion things. I'm very business oriented. I do a lot of things. So this actually launched some things that I was actively working on. And again, that was also very organic and serendipitous. I do what I love to do, and I try to share my love with people. That's it. And I hope that the pattern I'm seeing is that because I'm sharing what I love with people, and I really love what I do, then it gets reciprocated back to me as far as people see my appreciation for it, and they appreciate my appreciation and the sharing component.
Awesome. So, William talked about the hunt, and so I'm going to read a quote from the International Review's special issue on collecting, in which you were featured. Is it along with your wife? There's a photograph of the two of you. And you talked about like your process and approach. And the quote is, "I thought there was no greater feeling than apprehending homicide suspects or rapists, informing the victims and their families of the apprehensions and bringing the persons to justice," he reflects. "But tracking down artists and artwork gives me such exhilaration and satisfaction, I can only compare it to this prevailing over crime." So that really speaks to like that cheetah that's getting ready to take down that gazelle. It's like, you know, the gratification that comes with acquiring a work of art that you believe that fits within the scope of your collection, that will enhance your collection, and certainly, you know, become part of your legacy. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, again, because of my background, I do a lot of research. And I go through a lot of auction houses, documents. There was one time I was at the Studio Museum. And usually when I finish an exhibition, I go to the bookstore. And I went to the bookstore and I bought a few books. Now, when I started collecting, I had a list of artists that I was interested in, that I wanted to be part of my collection. And one of those was Melvin Gray Johnson. And I was reading a book that I got from the Studio Museum, and I read the name of the collector that loaned me. So now I started researching the names of the collector. And I realized one collector lived in East Orange. I'm like, wow, she's right in my city. So then at that time, they listed phone numbers in the phone book. So I went to the phone book, saw a lady's name. She had a very unique name, so it was easy to find. And I called her, and I said, you know, hello, my name is William Robinson, I'm a collector. And I understand your family has collected Melvin Gray Johnsons. And she says, well, yes, we have, but I really don't give out too much information, you know, over the phone because I don't know you. So I said, well, let me introduce myself. I'm the chief of police in your city. She said, yeah, right. You're the chief of police. Come by the house. I'm like, okay. So I got in my police car. I drove by her house. I came out, knocked on the door, and she was astonished. I was standing there in my police chief's uniform, and she said, come on in. Came in, and her family had 5 Melvin Gray Johnsons. And unfortunately, I couldn't afford any of them. She sold 2 at Swan's, and they went over a few $100,000. But that's just an example how, you know, when you want to find something and it means a lot to you that you'll go by any means, legal means, to get it done.
So Amath, as it relates to the categories of collecting, which category did you see yourself in?
I saw myself more so in the, not necessarily novice, but when I looked at sort of what you had up there, I don't collect this year in particular because I made one major purchase, but I tend to collect between 1 and 5 pieces a year. And I also tend to have a very specific focus. So, like I said before, I tend to, when I was looking, I was kind of overwhelmed by the amount of art and artists that were out there. So I've had to find a way in my type A personality brain to whittle that down. So I said, okay, well, let me look at the top MFA programs in the United States. Let me look at the top residencies. Let me look at all of those things as far as determinations as to the potential, not necessarily value, but the potential increase in the notoriety of the artist and of their work. So then I also went to look at some of the masters like Julia Mahertu, Kerry James Marshall, Kende Wiley, who I looked at their sort of resume or their CV to see what were they doing, and sort of at that, in the emerging mid-career level, where were they at? What collections were they in? What exhibitions were they in? And that sort of focused how I sort of collected in the beginning, because I said, well, I can't necessarily create my own rubric and think it's going to be wonderful, but I can follow this sort of focus. So that's why you'll see a Caitlin Cherry, you'll see other ones who have either exhibited at the Studio Museum, in the collection of the Studio Museum, or they were in the residency of the Studio Museum, because that became like a big demarcation for me. And then from that point, I then moved on to say, okay, well, what are the top MFA programs? Did they do Oxbow as a residency? Did they do Skowhegan? Did they do anything else like that? And that became sort of my initial litmus test. When I got more comfortable with my own eye, and then when I realized that I'm actually, through that process, I'm passing up on people who I really like. So I will talk about the people who I did not collect, because that's just as important. The people I missed out on. I missed out on Amy Sherrill. I missed out on Joyce J. Scott. I missed out on Stephen Towns, who was here. And it wasn't necessarily because I didn't enjoy their work or didn't like it. It was because I was scared, right? So this is a lot of money for me at least, and I was trying to make sure I understood how does this fit in. It didn't fit in perfectly with what I was doing. So I didn't allow myself that flexibility, and I would say that for anyone who's interested, create a rubric, create a format or a formula that works for you intuitively so that you kind of get, but also leave yourself room to be flexible. So if you do see something that is interesting that you like, but it doesn't fit what you kind of go for normally, go for that, because you may be surprised and it may actually help expand so that you get to the point where you are a lion and a cheetah and all that and, and whatnot. So that's kind of what I'll say to that small thing.
I think that's really sound advice for people who are, at the same, that would fall into the same collecting category as yourself. So I read, and I'm going to counter this with 2 questions. One, in an article that you provided me, that you have a lot of figurative work, and now you're trying to pivoting a bit and looking at abstraction. And I know that you have several works by artists who created, who are abstractionists. And but something else that I read about your process of collecting is that you do several things. One is that you will buy an early work by an artist. Another is that you will buy more than one piece by an artist, with the thinking behind that being that you may at some point want to sell it, but don't want to create a void in your collection. So I wanted you to expand on that, and I'm going to pivot back to you for a moment, because figurative work is really like in demand right now. Like most of my artists that I represent now are creating figurative work, but I also love abstraction. So I wonder what is the motivating or the thought behind you wanting to kind of give abstract work a more serious consideration.
Okay, so all right. I do a lot of things based on how I feel about it. Like I trust my gut, to be very honest with you, but I just kind of like to do that. I kind of look around my home and what I'm doing, and I see just a lot of people looking at it. To be very honest with you, I see just a lot of faces, a lot of people looking at it. And I kind of feel like I want to break that up with like different depictions that are not so true to life, right? So it's not as if like the figure is a completely off a figure. I'm not really looking so hard anymore at like depictions that are so true to life, where it's just like you're taking a photograph and you're doing portraiture, or you're doing something that's very lifelike. As far as the abstracts, I just feel like I haven't really ventured there yet. Not so much. I just started with like Mildred Thompson. I was able to get like some Mildred Thompson works before she kind of popped with the whole, what was it, the event? She was at the Women's Museum? It was
Oh, the abstraction.
she did abstract show. I can't remember what it was called.
Yeah, that was a large.
Magnetic field.
Magnetic field,
Yes.
exactly, right? So right before, almost like right before, or as soon as that happened, I got an opportunity to pick up some of the Thompson works, and it was kind of again organic. So I thought that moving into looking at abstract work was something that was challenging to me, and also it breaks up in my opinion, this regularity of just looking at people looking back at me. So that's just the feel, that's how I feel about it. But it's not, I'm not against it, I just want to expand my palette. I feel like my palette's growing, I'm starting to appreciate different things. And I always thought that the first thing that I attach to, maybe some collectors, is the figure, because it's easy to understand. But, you know, things that are not so tied to the distinct figure, they excite you in some way, and it generates a feeling in you, in my opinion, that you kind of have to think of and wrestle with a little bit, like why does this? Maybe it's just the choice of colors and the placement of things. It's a different sort of appreciation that I'm kind of challenging myself to get into and to kind of grow the overall collection.
So William, tell us a little bit more about your strategy in buying more than one piece by a particular artist.
Well, what my strategy is I like collecting the early work by the artists, mid-career work and then more advanced work, because it gives you an opportunity to see the artist's growth and their potential and where they're going next in the future. Also important, as Myrtis said, collecting multiples. As I mature as a collector, I began to realize that there are certain artists that I'm void in my collection that are very important. And a lot of them may be outside my price range. So I developed a strategy where if I have multiples, I can sell one, still have the artist in my collection, but I can use the resources from that sale to acquire a much more expensive work that I feel I need for my collection that tells full history of African American.
Thank you. So I have so many questions, but I feel like the audience will probably get a chance to pose a question or two. So I'll turn the floor over, and does anyone have any questions?
Mike.
All the way in the back.
Okay, give me one of the wireless mics.
Can you ask me this back? Thank you.
Excuse me.
Hello, how are you guys? Thank you so much for sharing your collection with us. So my name is Latoya Hobbs. I'm a local artist here, and I wanted to kind of get your take on studio visits with artists. So how do you engage artists for studio visits, and then what is an ideal experience for you visiting an artist's studio?
I can take that. So I've done a few of them. Some of them have been wonderful. Some of them have been horrible experiences I never want to go back to. So the great ones have been ones in which there's a conversation. You see a variety of different art at different stages. So some that are completed, some that are in process, and some that are ones that in the ideation stage. So that's one thing. Another thing that makes it really helpful is if you're able to discuss with the artist, and the artist understands that you're not an artist yourself, you may be more of a novice or not, but there's a level of respect there that you're genuinely interested in the work and in their process. So if they can talk coherently and succinctly about their process and what they're trying to do and sort of where they see themselves and can answer those questions and actually for the artists themselves to ask you questions as well, that back and forth is really helpful. Things that make it really painful is when the artist is maybe either very, very shy, where they just don't really want to speak to anyone. They just want to produce the work and have someone else sort of talk about it for them, which is perfectly fine. And something else to sort of watch out for is that a sale may happen and may occur, but oftentimes that's not going to happen on the initial studio visit. So I think coming from that standpoint where you're creating a relationship as opposed to a transaction is more important, because when that transaction doesn't happen, oftentimes people, understandably, if that was their impression, can get very frustrated and upset.
I would just say, I don't go past the person studio unless I'm willing and wanting to buy work. I just don't even waste their time on my own. I've done some studio visits, and generally every studio visit I did because I wanted to acquire some work. I kind of feel like, you are dealing with people's livelihoods here, right? If I was curating a show and I was like in a space where it's like, oh, I'm looking for works to acquire for the show, a bar for the show, that's something different. But generally, I'm not going to visit your studio unless I'm interested in acquiring your work, because I don't want to waste your time, and I don't want to I kind of very, conscious about being upfront about my intention and only going with the intention is to buy something.
I actually enjoy going to studio visits and visiting artists. And when I go there, I go there for a purpose, to see the artist process, to talk to the artist, to get to know the artist. And I want the artist to get to know me because just as important it is for me to want a certain artist in their collection, the artist should have the same feeling about who's, being involved in other people's collection and what that person is doing. And one of the main things I find that artists always appreciate is that you're a person, you're a collector that shares the work in your collection because they want their work shared with the larger canon of collectors and the public.
Any other questions?
I'm a Baltimore local artist. My artist name is Color Artist Move. I have a couple pieces that a lot of people have never seen before because they were sort of projects. So it's just a great event for me to learn about how y'all collect because some of my pieces that I've been having struggles with either mass producing it or just selling it and never seeing it again. So it's like, what is your opinion as a collector to an artist? Like, if I mass produce it, then everybody has a piece of it. But if I just sell it one time, then it's just that one piece. And then how is that one piece priced versus you can make, if you sell it to millions of people, you just make millions of dollars a long period of time versus you selling it one time, then you just gotta wait over time for that value of that one piece to increase. So that's where I'm stuck on
Well, what I would advise you is first, you have to decide within yourself what type of artist you want to be. Do you want to be what we consider a fine artist, which can still produce prints but is going to do a limited amount, and what we call rare prints, 20 or less? Or do you want to be an artist that produces multiple, like Charles Bibbs, and be a popular artist or more of a commercial artist? That's a decision you have to make within yourself first. And once you make a decision on which way you want to go, then that's the population of collectors that you will, represent, that you want to represent them in their collection. So that's the decision you have to make first. We as collectors, if you're asking me my advice, I always say go towards fine art because that gives you an opportunity to be in museums, not just in gallery representation. It gets you exposed in literature and written about. So if you're looking for advice, that would be my advice. But the bottom line is basically what you want to do and where you see your future and your career going.
Any other questions?
I just had a kind of practical question as a collector. For the larger scale pieces that you have, are you holding them at your home? Do you have them in storage? Are you lending them out? I'm just curious about, there's some pieces that I've seen that may be too large for the house that I have currently that I'm really interested in. So I was just curious about how you kind of handle pieces that don't necessarily fit into your space.
All my work in my collection is in my home unless it's out for loan at museums and institutions. I live with my art every day. As the article said, it's part of what calms me down. Now that I'm retired, I don't have the stress that I had as a law enforcement officer, but now I have the stress of I have more time to look at art and not follow the budget that I always say that I have and never have. And many times when I'm putting my kids through college, I had to back down, so I had to go through a 12-step program. Not
But you got a big house. So you can put all your art in your house.
Pass the microphone back.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. I'm neither an artist nor a collector. I'm probably pre-novice on your opinion. But I am in higher education. And there was mention earlier about the historic role of HBCU, art galleries, and museums as the principal institutional collectors of our works for a very long time. Of course, we know that many HBCUs are in peril, and certainly their art galleries and museums are teetering on the edge first. So I just wonder if any of you, as you think about perhaps estate planning or thinking about your legacies and this universe of relationships that you all spoke about as being important to cultivate as collectors, are you thinking about HBCU art galleries? What are your relationships to them? And how can you build those up while you are doing your private collecting?
All right, so I pay attention to Spelman's museum. Like, I don't, like, from the HBCU museum standpoint, I think Spelman is like, like literally, you should, if you're not already paying attention to what they're doing, you should pay attention to that. As far as like supporting institutions, HBCUs with their, you know, their shows, I'm open. If anybody contacts me and says, hey, I want to come tour your house, or oh, do you possibly have a piece, or whatever it is, I am completely open to all of it. I have not gone to any HBCU and tried to engage them and say, oh, do this, do that, because I feel like I'm still building my personal collection. But if anybody engages me, I'm very open and, you know, to all things, conversations. But I'm only just mentioning because I went to Morehouse. So it's like, Spelman's museum is off the hook. Like, it really is. Like, and they really have their pulse on something like tremendous. So if anybody's not paying attention, you should pay attention to what Spelman is. I know that for a fact.
So just to piggyback off of that, I think it's really important that while giving art and doing that is very important for folks here, I think it's equally as important to also give money to those galleries and to HBCUs so that they have the financing. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense for someone who wants to, like, if you build out this great collection of hundreds and hundreds of pieces and you say, I really want to give it to X university, if there's no money there to fund the scholarship, to fund the just maintenance of it, it's almost like they can't handle it. So I think it's really important. There needs to be another conversation there about just, quite frankly, just giving cash, giving dollars, so that you're giving it to professionals who know exactly how they can use their money. So perhaps that's probably the best thing to do at this point. So that way they have that foundation and they have the ability to accept and do the scholarly research and keep the momentum going, because there is going to be a time where the pendulum is going to swing back, where African American art may not be as hot as it is right now. And we still need to have those institutions, we need to have all of the infrastructure there that was before, that held us down before this became the hot thing, to be there. So I think that's a conversation we both as a people and as a community need to have about the support we give HBCUs generally, and also when it comes to art in particular.
For me, in all my readings, HBCUs are the foundation of African American art collections. That's where it started. It started even before the major museums. And for me and a lot of my friends that are collectors, we support the HBCUs any way that we can, financially, loaning our works. I believe it's very important. Something like the Hampton. You know, as a collector, I used to have fundraisers at my home and invite artists for different organizations, my power program for Jack and Jill. And each time I had, you know, a fundraiser, part of that was to raise money for the International Review of African American Art, which was started by Dr. Samela Lewis. And it's probably one of the last journals of African American art, and I think that as collectors, as patrons of art, we all should be supporting the International Review of African American Art. So anything that I can do, and most of my friends and the collectors can do, as it relates to HBCUs, we're willing to do. All you have to do is reach out.
Question back here.
There's another question in the room. Thanks for this wonderful discussion. You mentioned the Pamela Joyner collection and also the issue of abstraction, which is figurative art. And I just wanted to say that the Joyner collection, which is the premier collection of abstract American art, African American art, will open at the Baltimore Museum of Art on September 21st. And it will be there all fall. And it's a wonderful opportunity to see a major collection with kinds of artists you've been talking about.
Thank you so much. Yes, and I also, William is being very humble. He has loaned many works from his collection to support several museum exhibitions around the country. And also there is another organization, probably not as well known, but will soon become well known, is the Perducci Foundation, their collection of African American art. They are now, or have embarked on a mission to loan works from their collection to historical Black colleges. And I know that they recently, and other museums that have historically not exhibited African American art. So I know that they had an exhibition at the Hampton Museum, which I think rivals Spelman's. And they're working on a collaboration with the Amistad and the Wadsworth Museum. So their collection is going to be touring the country. So there are a lot of civically minded individuals who have built very important art collections that are now being very generous, as William has, in loaning works. Pat Walters has as well, and loaning works to institutions to help put the Black experience into context as it relates to America's history. We are still very segregated, and the arts is an industry that is highly segregated to this day. So the integration of Black art into the American story is one that museums are slowly, the churn has been slow in realizing that it is important for them to commit to doing that. And there are different motivations for doing it. Some are pure and others not so. But as long as the effort is there, then it's fine with me, because the outcome is, the takeaway is that the community and all of us are better for being exposed to it. So I think that we're running a little long, so we should close.
Running out of space.
All right. So I want to end by thanking our wonderful panelists.